A little while ago, I watched a video by Anthony Gramuglia about objective critics and a bit of the drama surrounding that. Now, I'm not really one to start anything with a specific creator on this platform, but I do find the topic very interesting, so I thought, hey, why not explore it as well? And where Anthony's video is more about the specific critics themselves and countering their arguments point by point, I would rather explore the topic in a much more philosophical way. Is it possible to be an objective critic? What are the merits of objectivity in critique? Is it better to not be objective? Do you even have a choice? My own personal bias certainly lies on Anthony's side with this argument. I personally believe that it's impossible to be objective when discussing things like media, because all of it is a matter of opinion, especially since criticism is, in and of itself, a matter of opinion. Sure, you can arrive at your opinion through objective means, but that does not make your opinion any less subjective. There is no such thing as an objective opinion because an opinion is by definition the opposite of objective. In other words, opinions are inherently subjective, and an objective opinion isn't an opinion at all, it's just the truth and a factual statement. Facts and opinions are mutually exclusive. They are opposites of one another, and to argue otherwise is completely dishonest, or at the very least, willingly ignorant. I think this topic is also filled to the brim with plenty of valid arguments, but if you know anything about deductive reasoning, then you know it takes more than an argument to be valid for it to be true. But before we get into any of that, let's hear a word from this video's sponsor, Manta Sleep. Guys, I gotta say, when I was approached by Manta Sleep for this, I was a bit skeptical at first. I thought that sleep masks weren't really all that useful, and waking up tired was just a thing that's meant to happen as you grow older. When I say that this sleep mask worked instantly for me, and I became a fan overnight, I quite literally mean it. This is one of those products that simply works, and it works well. And they're willing to help you get better sleep with the code on screen to get 10% off. This sleep mask is an investment, not just in your own comfort, but also in your quality of life while you're awake. You won't know just how tired you were until you wake up feeling refreshed. Head on over to the link in the description and use my discount code to get 10% off at checkout. Anyways, back to the rest of the video. I think there's a concept that many people on the internet don't understand, and which I have talked about in previous videos. That being the concept that an argument can be valid, but that doesn't necessarily mean it is true. In logical reasoning, there is this concept of a sound argument, which is a completely different criteria from being a valid argument. For an argument to be valid, the assumptions made based upon the premises given must be logical. However, validity has no bearing on whether or not the premises are true in the first place. If I were to say, all apes have 3 arms, all humans are apes, therefore all humans have 3 arms. That is obviously not a true statement, but it is a valid one. If all apes have 3 arms and humans are apes, then it logically stands that humans must also have 3 arms. However, this is not a sound argument, because we know that not all apes have 3 arms. In other words, one of the premises given is false, which therefore makes the conclusion false. Let's try another statement, but let's make this statement something that an objective critic might try to say. Let's talk about their favorite punching bag, the Star Wars sequel trilogy. Here's a common argument I see from the objective critics. All stories with a Mary Sue in them are poorly written. Rey is a Mary Sue character in Star Wars. Therefore, the Star Wars sequels are poorly written. So, what we have here is once again a very valid argument, and we might even agree with the premises made. There are plenty of people, myself included, who would say that Rey is a Mary Sue, or at the very least she's a poorly written main protagonist. However, neither the first nor the second premise are provably true, because one's measure of quality in writing is always subjective. So can we say that all stories with a Mary Sue in them are poorly written? Is it a fact or an opinion? Is it possible for a story to still be good despite the presence of a Mary Sue character? We might be quick to say no, but I know there are a lot of people who loved Solo Leveling, and that features a Mary Sue character. But then we might argue back and forth as to whether or not there is a Mary Sue character in either Star Wars or Solo Leveling. Even if we assume the first premises is true, that being that all stories with Mary Sues in them are poorly written, can we objectively state Rey is a Mary Sue? Or is that also a matter of subjective opinion? Yes, there might be a majority consensus that Rey is a Mary Sue. I personally believe that Rey is a Mary Sue character. However, not everyone believes she is, and some people do find enjoyment in the sequel trilogy. The conclusion made is false because, even though the statement is valid and logical, it is built upon false premises. We cannot say that all stories with a Mary Sue in them are poorly written, nor can we say that Rey is objectively a Mary Sue character, as the criteria for determining these things is a matter of subjective opinion. Opinions can be neither true nor false. They are neutral and subjective, and in order for any argument to be sound, then all premises must be true, and the conclusion must be a valid conclusion made from those premises. I go into detail about this topic because I think it's helpful for understanding why it is impossible to be an objective critic. We can judge things on objective merits. We can attempt to remove our biases from our critiques. However, a critique will always be subjective at the end of the day. What one critic may attempt to establish as an objectively good way to write a story or a character is always going to be a matter of that critic's subjective opinion. There is no objective measure, no amount of boxes to check or literary devices to use in order to formulate a good story. There may even be stories which are written from a very good technical standpoint, but which do not resonate with certain people because the emotions did not land. Let's say that you're reading a book by someone who has the most beautiful prose in the world, but the characters were boring and stereotypical, or perhaps even inconsistent in their motivations. Think of how you would enjoy that first story. Now switch over to a different story, one that has very compelling characters, but one which is not written very well, at least in a technical sense. There's a lot of grammatical errors and issues with the syntax, and things don't quite read correctly on the page, but the characters themselves, they interact really well and the dialogue is extremely good. Which of these stories would you prefer to read? The answer is, it depends. It depends on how severe the flaws of these two works are, and the severity of these flaws is a matter of subjective opinion. For many people, the severity of Sung Jin-woo being a Mary Sue is not enough to stop watching or even loving the show. For others, it's a reason to consistently dog on it, myself included. This is at the heart of my argument on this topic. We might be able to assume that these rules and laws of writing are objective, that in order to write something good, we must avoid certain things and make use of good writing practices instead. There's a lot of great advice for writing a good story and making compelling characters, which will help you consistently bring out the best in your writing. However, just as there is no such thing as a perfect story, there's also no such thing as a perfectly bad story, and we often correlate the quality of a story with our enjoyment of the story. However, people enjoy The Room while agreeing that it is a poorly written movie. So, for what reason do we really judge writing if not for our own personal enjoyment? Is there some other reason we develop these rules and critique under this structure? Or is it the structure itself which is subjective and has many exceptions to the rules it creates? A flaw in one person's mind can be the selling point in another's. Just look at Brandon Sanderson's Mistborn series for an example. I personally love the intricate detailing of a magic system and world building within its books. However, there might be readers who are more concerned with immersion and emotion than they are with reading about a cool new magic system or how a sword fight might play out. Where one reader might consider it a flaw that Sanderson spends so much of his book world building, another reader might exclusively read Sanderson's books because of how much they like fantasy world building. There is this concept that I've been developing about critics on the internet. Among the critics you know, read the reviews of, or watch the videos of, which of them is the best critic? The answer is going to be different for every one of you. My personal favorite critic is Dunkey because he never takes himself or his opinions too seriously, but he always finds a way to make a compelling argument for the games he enjoys and the games he dislikes. Dunkey is an emotionally driven critic. He goes off of vibes more often than the objective merits of whatever he's critiquing. We also get to see where Dunkey's bias lies in many of his videos. He prefers skill-based games and faster-paced action titles over the more methodical and strategic turn-based titles. As for me personally, I love turn-based games, and I always have. And just because Dunkey is my favorite critic, that doesn't mean I think he's always correct on his judgment or that any game he dislikes is objectively bad. I like Dunkey exactly because I know where his biases lie and I appreciate his perspective for what it is. If I'm looking to know whether or not a new platformer is worth picking up, I'll see if Dunkey likes it or not. Now, for everyone else who has answered this question, among the critics you know which of them is the best, I reckon that you also don't agree with everything that critic says or espouses during their critique. You might value different things from me when it comes to your favorite critic. You might enjoy a more academic and logical type of critic. However, I don't think you'd say that those critics are correct all of the time, and I don't think that presenting oneself and one's own opinions as anything but subjective is worthwhile to do. Where the objective critic may argue that their opinion is factual and correct because it is based upon factual premises, we may also find that their premises are not always factual, and even if they are, then we may find that the conclusions made about these facts are ultimately subjective and therefore neither true nor false. They may have similar tastes to you when it comes to media, or perhaps they are ones that you can trust the opinions of because you know where their perspective is coming from. We make decisions on what we will like and not like based on the opinions of critics we respect. There may be a collective consensus on the quality of a certain story, and we may agree with that consensus. But we can also come to disagree with that consensus. And oftentimes, it doesn't feel very good to be in the minority opinion. Sure, we can make logical arguments to state our case, but those opinions are going to be put under an extra layer of scrutiny because they do not adhere to the majority opinion. Perhaps some arguments can be so compelling that they shift public opinion in one direction or another. However, sometimes it's just not possible. In the same vein, even though I agree with someone like Anthony that objective critics are lying to themselves, I'm not so sure I could make that statement as an absolute fact. Because just as there is a difference between a valid and sound argument, there's also a difference between being truthful and the truth itself. There is a difference between lying and being ignorant to certain facts. The objective critic might argue that people disagree with facts all the time, but that does not make them less factual. That, in and of itself, is a factual statement. However, it is made with the assumption that the objective critic is always speaking in objective facts, which they objectively aren't. Because once again, the only objective thing about criticism in media is that it is inherently subjective, and it always will be. No matter how many facts you state, your conclusion is still subjective. Your response and your critique might be informed. It might draw upon established and scholarly sources. You might make an argument that convinces most people to agree with you. However, your argument is always subjective because these rules are not laws and they are always dependent on the context surrounding them. We might argue that a story with a main character who can defeat all of his enemies with a single punch is a recipe for a boring story. That is, until you see One Punch Man break that rule as it tells one of the most engaging stories in the last decade. We might posit that a good main character who can carry a story is one who is emotive, charismatic, and pushes the story forward. Then we see a show like Frieren, where the journey is the point and the plot is generally irrelevant. A story should be written about adults in order to tackle deep and thoughtful topics, only to see something like Avatar: The Last Airbender cover those topics with a cast of children far better than most shows with adult casts tend to do. A video game should make sure to hold the player's hand when necessary, so as not to obstruct their good experience with a frustratingly difficult area or boss encounter. Everything should be easily understood, and the mechanics of the game should feel good to play. In fact, every game should have a difficulty scale because that makes it more accessible for everyone to play and enjoy to their own tastes. After all, why would we want to be forced to play a difficult game when life is already so difficult? And then you see a game like Elden Ring or Dark Souls or Silk Song or anything where the difficulty is the point. These are games which helped some people through tough times in their lives precisely because it was a difficult challenge, which shows that we can persevere and accomplish more than we first believed possible. And in this scenario, a difficulty slider would have cheapened our experience and prevented us from feeling something we never thought we could feel from a video game. A book must grab the reader's attention from the first chapter to be worth reading. It must engage and hold on to that engagement by pushing the plot forward. Until you read something like Lord of the Rings, which takes an insane amount of time in its first act to actually move the plot anywhere. Having the majority opinion does not make something factual. It does not make one critic more correct than the other. It does not make them more objective than the other. However, knowing the biases of a critic, knowing their tastes, and appreciating their subjective perspectives is still useful for finding things that we ourselves might enjoy. Criticism is also still useful because it can provide a perspective and conclusion the creator themselves never thought of. It can help an artist create the best version of what they want to make. However, criticism can also be completely useless depending on the perspective of the critic. I don't think Tolkien should listen to critics who might say that his prose is too flowery or that he takes too long to start the plot of his story. Simply because I know I would enjoy the story less if he followed a more modern style of writing. The majority opinion can shift over time, or it can remain static. Things which were once considered to be objective masterpieces can fall out of favor, such as Harry Potter. Or things which were once panned by critics can later be considered modern masterpieces, such as a Van Gogh painting. Even the Mona Lisa was not considered to be an incredible work of art until somebody wanted to steal it. And at the end of the day, we must understand that sometimes we like something precisely because it's bad. Sometimes the enjoyment we derive from media is from the things we attach to it, and not the objective merits of that media. When we rate our opinions on a numeric scale, we might be inclined to view this as an objective measure of our enjoyment. But that's not always the case. Different critics judge on different criteria all the time. Some judge by their enjoyment. Others judge by objective merits. Others are consistent in the way they attribute their numbers, but some are completely inconsistent and based on the mood of that critic on any given day. And yet, neither style of critique actually captures whether or not a certain piece of media is worth engaging with. If we judge things on their objective merits and not our enjoyment, then we find the numeric scale to be a poor judge. Where a 1 or a 2 out of 10 should be the worst of the worst, we tend to find that it's actually the 4 and 6 out of 10s, which are the worst because they are boring despite being competently made. If we judge things on our enjoyment, then we often find the rating inconsistent, no matter what number is given to it. We might question why one critic ranks a certain show as a 9 out of 10, while ranking something else collectively agreed to be a masterpiece as a 7 out of 10. The critic might even find themselves wanting to revise their ratings in relation to how they created previous media. And even if we mix the two, we tend to find the ratings both lacking consistency and meaning. The critic we trust the most is the critic who does not take their own opinions too seriously. The one who judges things unapologetically and does not force themselves to come up with an objective number to present their take as more correct than others, where we can see their critique as it is by the words they use to review it, never having a moment of, "It was boring, uninspired, the worst piece of dog shit I've ever played, nothing redeemable about it, too much water, 8 out of 10, IGN." Perhaps we cannot say for certain that an objective critic is lying to themselves. Perhaps they have deluded themselves into believing their opinions are objectively correct. However, I think we can safely say that any critic who attempts to present themselves as someone without bias, or someone who is always correct, or someone who will make corrections when they are factually proven wrong, is a critic who is lying to you. They're lying to you because they're promising the impossible. They're lying to you because even if they think their position is the truth, the inevitable failure to fulfill their promise turns their statement into a lie. There is no such thing as an objective critic. There is no such thing as removing your biases when providing your subjective opinion on something. Someone can have an even-handed or level-headed approach to their criticism. They can look at things from multiple angles. They can reveal their biases, and they can be honest with their viewer. However, they can never be objective because the act of criticism requires subjectivity. Nothing will change that fact. The objective critic will only make a correction when their opinion of something has changed. There are many people who want to believe that their opinions are greater than those of others. Ones who take great pride in being a good critic or having good tastes. We make fun of people who don't agree with us. We chastise them for their stupid and uninformed opinions on media that we happen to enjoy. And we're not wrong to do so. We're just not right either. That's the point. Opinions are a neutral thing. They are neither correct nor incorrect. They are opinions. You agree or disagree with them, and that's all there is to it. Perhaps there might be objective methods to improving upon something that you're making. There are objective fundamentals which can be utilized or subverted. It is possible to create something which is widely loved by the majority of people, or to appeal very strongly to your niche. Because not everybody's goal is popularity or critical acclaim. It's not always what the writer or artist is striving for. Sometimes we just want to create something in a way that appeals to us. Sometimes we're driven to action because we enjoy the process. Sometimes a critique is useless, and other times it opens up a world of new possibilities. At the end of the day, though, critique is an exercise of neutrality, which can either break down or build upon something which has already been made. It is a reaction to creation, and it is not creation itself. So if you've made it this far in the video, take this time to be a little bit more creative. Open up a document and start writing.